Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Everything that I've read says that sheep are attuned to the only voice of their shepherd, whether it is words that are spoken, a melody, just sounds. They learn this, and they know who their shepherd is. I've never witnessed it personally, but through the magic of Google, you can just type in shepherd calling sheep, and there's some delightful little videos of watching this in action. Two of them were just wonderful to see. There was it was a farm in Europe, and there was a mixed ethnicity background of college-age kids with this farmer, and the farmer taught them what his song was, if you would, his calling. And they'd go and they'd try it and nothing happened, and they were giggling and embarrassed and all that. And then he did it, and before he knew it, like all the sheep came out of the pasture to the fence where he was at. It was just delightful. There is a different one where it's a woman who's the shepherd, and it's here in the United States somewhere, and she is calling her sheep to do that. And they come to this little creek, I mean like 2 feet wide. And she keeps calling and calling. All of a sudden, they just start taking this running leap and jump over it all. Entertaining if you want to do something on Mother's Day today, just Google it. What I think come closest to for that connection to a shepherd is parents and their infants, like Ellen or Jane over here. There is something about they can follow the voice of the parent, especially the mom, in any room situation. It's this built-in sonar. They know the voice of the mom, and they follow it wherever it goes within the room. Those simple things that Jesus said, I just want to talk a little bit about that today. And he begins by saying, my sheep know my voice. That there's some familiarity with the voice of the shepherd. And so, of course, the invitation is, how familiar am I when I listen to God's voice? What do I need to do, perhaps, to be attuned to it better? I think, first of all, about the story of Samuel and Eli. Eli is a temple worker, and Samuel has been given to him in his formation. Sleeping during the night, you know the story, and in the middle of the night, Samuel gets a vision, a voice vision, and so he goes to Eli, wakes him up in the middle of the night. Sort of like parents and kids, you know how that thing goes during the middle of the night. And he says, "You called me." Eli said, "I didn't call you, go back to bed." And it goes on 2 or 3 times, and finally Eli has an amazing wake-up moment. He goes, "The next time it happens, simply say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" So in this case, there was someone else who became attuned that this was God speaking to him. And so to introduce him to the voice of God and make that connection for him. Sometimes, certainly, as we listen to the Word of God and we do various spiritual readings, we will see some of the repeated phrases of God is how we become familiar with the voice of God. Sometimes, certainly in your own prayer time, but is included in that time, we do need to be quiet. It's not just a monologue with God. You know, we get in, we do a few formal prayers, tell God what we need, and say, "See you tomorrow." But really am I quiet enough and still enough so that I may hear God speak to me? At the same time, there are other things that are vying for our attention that keep us from hearing the voice of God. Certainly that magic little black thing called the cell phone. You know, we're having our music, so we put our buds in, so that keeps us from hearing from others or what might be going on. It might be we're listening to a talk, a podcast, but whatever it is, we get a little narrowed, or we're right away tweeting back or responding to the text that comes in. Do we really listen? Do we read between the lines sometimes to do that? And so that might be one thing that keeps us from hearing and becoming familiar with the voice of God. One of the things certainly in advertising, might keep us from hearing the voice of God, because one of the purposes of advertising, and simple enough, is to tell us about ways to be happier or better, or this will be good for you. But you also know or aware of still the little trick that those commercials are a little bit louder than the show, aren't they? Wanting to get your attention. So a lot of voices vying for our attention. And maybe sometimes we don't hear the voice of God simply because of the things that are going on in our lives make us a little bit more introverted, maybe introspective, and we're not hearing other voices that are out there. Whatever the case might be, it's an invitation for each of us to become familiar with the voice of God. Just as little Eleanor Jane is getting so familiar with mom and dad's voice, grandparent voices, everybody like that around her. Jesus then says, I know my sheep. Now, the knowledge that he speaks about is not just these sort of factual things, but knowledge in the way of intimacy. I really know my sheep. I do believe that a basic desire each of us has is to be known by someone else. For many, it's your spouse. For many, it's also just a good friend to be known. Same time, it gets a little scary if someone knows you that well. If they know everything about me, there are days that I don't like myself. I hope they like me still. But the shepherd is saying, I know everything about you. And it gives me great joy to love you without any strings attached. I think that's one of the real gifts that mothers model for us about Jesus the shepherd and God over all. How often it was, I know what's going on. My mom would just say, what's bothering you? It's like that mom radar. It cuts through everything, and you know that something's not right. Sometimes you just wait them out, and they'll tell you, but you know where it is for there. And then the final thing that takes place is almost like an equation. We hear the voice of God. We also know how deeply we are loved and known. And so the next thing is to follow him. When we have that person in our lives who knows us so well, who loves us unconditionally, who speaks to our hearts, we want to be with them. And so to do that, if our music ministry wasn't overtaxed, now would be the time when I would say, cue the music from Sister Act and do I Will Follow Him, Then it would bring closure to this homily that way. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. Simple, profound, challenging. It is what discipleship is about, but it's also what Justin and Colleen are doing for their daughter. They're helping her to become familiar with the voice of God. They're also certainly letting her learn what it means to be loved unconditionally. And then she will continue to grow in their love and follow their voice, follow them as a daughter as she grows up.